the ultimate goal is for your clients to become your friends.
Yeah.
To work on projects that you would listen to their music, whether you worked with them or not.
That's engineer and mixer Brendan Dekora. Brendan's worked with some of the biggest names in rock, including artists like Trent Reznor, Foo Fighters, Steven Wilson, and Muse. Since Brendan and I both started our careers at iconic Los Angeles studios and have since moved to be freelance, I thought that could be a great topic for discussion. So this one is about everything freelance, from finding clients to remote collaboration. We get into stuff like why big credits don't matter as much as you might think.
Credits don't matter. Big, stuff you've worked on, at the end of the day, doesn't matter, because there's still going to be a mountain of people that want to work with you because you are who you are.
When to consider what types of gigs are actually in line with your goals.
There's so many projects that I took on in the past that, I did because it was a great opportunity, but looking back, it wasn't a great career choice.
And why it's important to have clear communication and understand expectations when working remotely.
If you're expecting the mixer to add doubles or create harmonies or change arrangements or those things are production choices.
If you're a freelance engineer or producer or want to make the move to become a freelancer, then you're definitely going to want to stick around for my interview with Brendan Dekora. So there are a lot of people that want to transition to engineering production full-time. You and I both worked in major studios and now are lucky enough to do that. What's your advice for someone that has a job, maybe it's music related, maybe it's not, and how to, become a full-time freelance engineer?
I mean, it's kind of an ongoing process, honestly.
Okay, fair enough. I agree.
But the biggest thing that I've learned recently is it's about the relationships. It's about your personality. You think about, I want to niche down on a genre, which is very important. But a lot of times people forget that it's about niching down on a certain personality type as well.
Ooh.
And that the idea that, the ultimate goal is for your clients to become your friends.
Yeah.
To work on projects that you would listen to their music, whether you worked with them or not.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate dream of every, ideal client is that.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring out how you can show that to the world, how you can show your personality, show your preferences, your musical tastes, that kind of thing. Because, it's like similar to like a session drummer, for example. There's 1,000 session drummers out there that can do the job.
Right.
Why would they hire this guy? Because they're cool, because they're a good hang in the room, because they have cool ideas, they have unique perspectives, that kind of thing. It's all those pieces that really set it apart from the rest.
Niching down on a personality type is like, I've never heard anybody phrase that way. That's so true, because there's a lot of great situations where I've been where you just like don't want to work with the person.
Right.
And the music was cool and it came out good, but everybody knows that like once we walk out the door, we're not going to work together again. We didn't really like each other.
Right.
Obviously, that can't be every gig.
Of course.
How do you approach trying to tap into finding people that you relate with?
It's something that I've been working on myself, even recently, to be honest. But I think that a lot of it is about the content that you put out. And showing that side of you to the world will attract those people anyway.
I agree with that.
And so, it's difficult, especially if you are working as an assistant in a big studio, you're the fly on the wall. Often you're not even allowed to talk to people. Like it's the engineer and the producer that are the main interface for the artist. So making that change of, becoming being the fly on the wall to being the engineer, producer, whatever it is, it's a personality change as well. So it's a lot about, everyone says this business is about psychology. But the more I've learned about psychology, the more I realize that that's actually true. So it's interesting. I've drifted from your question, but
it's funny. I just had a conversation with somebody else who also has a podcast. We should tell people that you have a podcast, and we'll talk about that more later. And we were talking about the advantages of making content as like a music producer, engineer, and you like really tapped into something about putting your real authentic self out there, which is something that I've like pushed on the podcast for a long time. But I think that's super valuable now because in our coming up, I would walk out the door at Capitol in Studio B and walk into Studio C and say hi.
Right.
You were at East West, Glenwood Place.
Mm-hmm.
You could do the same. Now you don't have that. Everybody's working at home.
Right.
Like, if people can find a way to understand who you are and if they click with you, I think that's just a really powerful, I hate to say marketing tool.
Yeah.
But it's a marketing tool.
It is. Yeah.
And if you're authentic, it should be fun. I'm sure you enjoy doing your podcast.
Exactly.
Because they're hard. If you didn't enjoy it, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Going freelance, is there something that caught you off guard about being freelance? Like something that you didn't expect to be a big responsibility or a big challenge?
I mean,
other than finding a gig, because everybody would answer that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it kind of goes back to that first topic of, figuring out the personality match.
Yeah.
And seeing, and really kind of discovering what their vision is for the song and talking to the clients and figuring out how much they like the rough mix even, like so many times, I'll get a project and I'll send over the rough mix and I think it sounds pretty good. And they're like, yeah, I hate this. This is totally the wrong direction. We need to go in this other direction over here. Or the opposite. There's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
So it's figuring out, where their journey is, what their goals are, and really trying to align with that as well.
Yeah, communication is probably everybody says communication is important, but I don't think, like, when you're starting out, like when you're a runner at the studio and you're just like getting coffee orders, I don't think you understand to what level communication is important. Yeah. It's like, might as well be like vibe in a room, communication, and then maybe skill set after that.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But vibe in a room. So your experiences working in the big studios, when did you kind of like connect the idea that being the best guitar player, the best drummer wasn't necessarily why those people were in the room?
Well, as people come through the door and they're frankly not great musicians, but they're the nicest people you've ever met.
Yeah.
It's like they're super cool, they're super nice, and sure, they get the job done on their instrument, but it's about the hang, it's about the feeling of it, it's about the friendship about it,
Yeah.
So that's obvious. If this business was about your skill set, then it would be a completely different world, so
very different. Very different. And obviously we're not talking about like the classic studio musicians.
Of course, the session players are the exception.
They have both. These guys that used to play like 3 sessions a day all through the 70s, like they have such a chill vibe.
Right.
And are just absolutely ridiculous. And I don't know if you've ever had this. I had it with Dean Parks.
Yeah.
And he was doing a nylon part.
And
I was putting the mic over here, like around the 12th fret. And he was like, on this one, we do it here. And I was like, okay, you know where it goes on this one. Done.
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually an accidental segue to another question I had, which is the importance of getting the production and the sonics right from the beginning, right? That's something that you and I have experienced working in big studios. We've seen people go down the rabbit holes of trying even different strats, not different types of guitars, different versions of the same guitar.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts that you can share with the bedroom producer about the importance of making those decisions early and how that benefits the process in the long run?
I think part of it is just a lack of knowledge on certain techniques. And that, oftentimes bedroom producers will try things out because they don't know, the different tactics. They've never been to studios. They haven't seen other people do it. And so they're just kind of figuring out based on what they're hearing on records. And again, with music, there's no correct answer. There's a lot of times really odd things can work really great.
Yeah.
But, often what's tricky is when, people will send me a mix and they say, oh, okay, cool. I want this to sound like, X number band that's, huge and that they've spent 6 months in the studio and they doubled and tripled everything and have harmonies and have all this production stuff going on. And they send me a track with one guitar on it.
Right.
And it's like, well, I can't, this is
So not the same thing.
not the same. Yeah. And so it's a little bit tricky because, oftentimes those people don't understand that's what that was because they've never seen that. They've never experienced that.
Yeah.
And so it's about learning and, obviously we'll have conversations. We'll talk about, it's like, okay, well, if you really want this, then put some doubles on there at least, so we can pan it out, whatever it is. But I hesitate to say YouTube because YouTube is such a, I don't hesitate to say it. There's a lot of amazing information on YouTube.
There is.
And I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of information that I guess it's hard to always know what information is correct or not. So it's difficult to know who to listen to, who to not listen to, because on the other extreme, I've gotten projects where, it's clear they watch YouTube a lot or try to learn a lot themselves, and they've sent me things with like every trick in the book. It's like all these different, techniques. It's like, oh, okay, they saw a video on this, or they someone told them to do this, and then, but it's like everything all combined. And so it's like, well, if you just got great sounds in a room with a great player and a great instrument with a good sounding room, would be better than all these tricks.
Right.
So it's, sometimes the basics are more easy to get great results than all the fancy stuff,
Yeah. There's a lot of things I want to say about what you just said. Let's go back to the YouTube thing because you're probably watching this on YouTube. Not you, but you.
Right.
There's a difference between information that's regurgitated and put out versus information that's based on experience.
Right.
And I think that's where the disconnect is, because there is bad information, but there's not a lot of, when it comes to like EQing, there's bad tricks.
Right.
But you're talking about people that maybe just haven't made records for 20 years.
Right.
And also the people that made records for 20 years probably aren't that good at sharing that knowledge in a way that connects with a hungry, want to learn audience. Meanwhile, there's somebody else that can regurgitate that information in a format that people are enjoy.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I love YouTube. I've learned so. We were talking about cameras before we started. Like, I've gone so deep down the rabbit hole of like, there's so, you can learn so much stuff for free.
Right.
But I also wanted to touch on the fact that I think it's our responsibility as engineers and mixers in the room to educate people on what they want, which is you were touching on. And that goes back to communication. You're like, well, I can't give you the vocal sound that you want.
Right.
Because it's just not here. But if you want to jump back, go turn your computer on, put a couple more doubles down, that's going to get you what you want. And I think that's something that is really important to do as an engineer, is to share that back with people and bring everybody up, along the way.
Yeah. And I guess one thing I wanted to say too is with the misinformation on YouTube, I guess there was one example recently where this friend of mine sent me this clip on Instagram that was about, getting great top end in your vocal, right?
Okay.
And so they basically went through keying the, like a dynamic EQ keyed with all the top end, all the bottom end rolled off. And it's like, well, he's just made a de-esser. And, then you boost it after. It's like, it's not that complicated. You just put a de-esser on it and turn one knob and then do the same thing. So it's like things like that where like people are trying to get sensational, like, oh, this amazing, really cool trick. It's like, well, if you just knew a little bit about how things work, then you see that that's not really,
Oh yeah. That reminds me of like some of the things that would come up when I was in school, because I went to engineering school. And it's like, let's make a de-esser on the SSL channel, right? You have to figure out how to do it, or like, we're going to record this in MS and you need to decode it.
Right.
And you're like, you pass your test and then you realize like, I don't need to know these things ever again.
Never.
It's like, this is pointless information now.
Right.
We're kind of touching on this, and this is another question that I had. Do you think that newer artists overweight the result of a mix? Are their expectations, because you and I both do a lot of remote mixing, do they put too much weight on what they believe is going to be the outcome of that mix, whether that be a sonic change or even a popularity change?
I would say yes, absolutely. It all depends on how much experience the artist has.
I agree with that.
Newer artists that may not have been through the process, that don't understand, there is a lot of that expectation. And I've even considered doing more production work because I get, those clients that want me to mix something, but really they need a producer and not a mixer.
Yeah.
And so, it's about learning. I mean, it all comes with experience, really. Once you go through the process and you get a mix done by a professional, you can see what they can and can't do. And, sometimes, as you can take a song very drastically in another direction with a mix. It can go a very, very long way.
And it can be a miss.
And it can be a miss, yes.
We've all done that.
Yes. But at the same time, it's, learning that how much you want to change it with the mix. And, whether that's, if you're expecting the mixer to add doubles or create harmonies or change arrangements or those things are production choices.
Yeah.
One client I had recently, sent me I've been working with them kind of helping them with production choices and say, okay, well, is this guitar sound cool? It's like, oh, it's a little bit darker. Let's, why don't you try this? And then we can go from there. Okay, cool. I'll change that and re-record a bunch of stuff. And then, but they asked me about this process where they were going to, add doubles and harmonies on all the vocals on all the songs. I'm like, well, yeah, I do encourage doubles and harmonies, but not everywhere for every note of the song. Like, choose the chorus or choose certain things you want to highlight, make those production choices
right
before you send it to mix, instead of sending me everything with everything and expecting me to chop through and create what you want based on that,
Yeah. That goes back to the communication. But I wanted to ask you about navigating that additional production. Like when you feel like something needs a boost and you're willing and think that you're the right person for it, how do you navigate that with an artist to be like, I think we need an extra step in here. Are you open to working with me in this capacity?
It's always a fine line because, growing up in big studios like we've seen producers and engineers, and there is a very distinct line between those two roles.
There is, or there was back in the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
But now it's, especially when people, like we were just talking about with a mixer, that they want to take the song further or whatever else, like, there's ways where, I'll always mention if I hear something that can help the song align with their vision a bit more. Of course, the artist always has veto power.
Right.
It's like, hey, like, I have this idea. You said you wanted this reference and you said you wanted it to sound like this. I think we need to do X, Y, and Z in order to get there. Do you want to go back and do this, or do you want to create this, or do you want to just not do it at all? It's all about how you phrase it and how you walk that line with the artist. And if you say it in a way where, you're just trying to help the end result, instead of like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And then if you like it, cool. But if not, then I think it sucks, like, obviously that's not the way to do it. But, so there's a fine line to walk.
Yeah. Well, I think I guess for an artist or producer that's listening, I think if you're willing to share work in progress with somebody you're thinking about working with as a mixer, and you're open to being like, hey, what do you think? Am I going to be able to get what I want?
Right.
That can be a really amazing way to split the difference. I know some people don't like to share unfinished work, but I mean, would you agree that that can be a massive benefit to the final product if they're willing to have a conversation of, do you think anything's missing?
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult too because, people will do that, but then I'm still just the mixer role.
Right.
So it's like, well, are you asking me to my production choices? Because you're working with a producer.
Right.
I don't want to step on their toes.
That's true. That's true.
So one thing that I've actually started to think about recently is that, I'm happy to do like co-production. Like if there's something I hear that could take it a little bit further, cool, I'll mention it, but I'm not trying to be your producer. I'm not trying to, take over the whole project and start, because obviously producers start before a note is recorded. They go through the songs and choose keys and arrangements and all that stuff before anything's done. So I'm not trying to do that, but if it's already to the point where everyone's happy, and then it's like, oh well, what if you do this one thing or these two things? Cool, like that's an idea that may or may not work, but I'm open to my creative input as well.
Yeah. No, you don't want to step on toes. I do agree with that. Since we're kind of talking remote collaboration, do you have any tips for successful remote mixing? Like if you're living in Indiana and you want to up your mix game, like do you have, whether it be a technical thing or a communication thing, anything that you would tell that person?
We talked about it a little bit before, but I am all about actually talking to people.
Yeah.
It's easy to do remote mixing and just all over emails and texting, and things get lost.
Yeah.
I think we're speaking before we started recording that, sometimes there's projects where the artist will, say, oh, can you turn the kick drum down? And then it's like, yeah, cool. Here's the version with the kick drum down. It's, oh, that's better. And then 3 days later, oh, can you turn up the low end on the kick? Like, well, I just turned it down. Like, yes, I can turn the low end up, and it's just a slight miscommunication.
Yeah.
Where if you get on a call with someone, I'll often do like a video call with high definition audio. There's numerous platforms to do that, but so we can work together and actually stream my mix to their studio, and I can explain like, oh, well, you asked for more low end on the kick, but really it's, because they were hearing it in their smaller car or their phone or something, and they weren't cutting through. It's like, well, it's, I actually need to do this. And so this is the correct solution, that I think you should do. And so it's easier to just talk through those things in 5 minutes instead of like, oh, but I did this. We're going in circles. Like, why are you, and then that's a miscommunication and people are upset. And, it's so much easier to just talk to people, in person.
Yeah. And it's about understanding the intention. I don't know. I'm sure you've done this, but like I used to send an email and be like, oh, here are the 5 things. This is how I addressed your notes. And I don't do that anymore. I'm just like, hey, I hit all your notes and then I made this change that I thought. Well, like if somebody asked for the vocal up, it might not necessarily be that the vocal needs to be louder. It might be that, the guitar needs to be a little darker and the vocal needs a little bit more top or something like that.
Exactly.
Because we all know if you send a mix with vocal too loud, you're never going to turn it back down. So it's, once it's already too loud, the singer's always going to love it loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. I think using tools. What was the one that you...
I like to use one called SessionWire,
which I'm not familiar with.
It's kind of like Audio Movers and Zoom put together in one platform. Okay. So you have video chat, there's a talkback channel, and there's a high definition channel.
Cool.
And there's like an auto mute thing for the talkback, and it's their whole goal with it is making it as if, like you're in the studio and there's a piece of glass between, they're just standing right there. You're talking back and forth, play the music. It's really seamless.
Nice.
So I've been liking it a lot.
Nice. I use something similar called Authentic Audio.
Okay.
Basically, we're talking about the same product,
right?
More or less.
Right.
I haven't used SessionWire, but you just described the features of Authentic Audio.
Awesome.
So I want to backtrack back a few minutes to where we were talking about, getting it right in the studio.
Right.
If I remember correctly, you are a drummer. That's your
my first instrument? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you jump in when you're recording and get into drum tuning? Like, what are your thoughts on? Because drums is one of those things that has to be, if the instrument sounds fucking great, the recording sounds fucking great.
Yeah.
Tips for great drums. What do you think? Do you get in there and tune?
I typically don't. I mean, at this point, I'm probably 95% of my work is mixing. But when I was doing more engineering, I was working in big studios. And so I had the luxury of working with great drummers that often even brought drum techs and all that, where you didn't have to, On rare occasions, yes, I'll get someone that comes in with the crappy sounding kit, and, I'll try to tweak it a little bit if the drummer isn't willing or capable or whatever to do that. But that's kind of walking a fine line, because I don't want to insult the drummer. It's like, oh, can you tune this up a little? And then they try and it still sucks. I'm like, well, could I do it then? Like, what do you, so it's walking a fine balance. But obviously, if you can get great sounding drums tuned up well and drummers that can play them well, that's 90% of the battle. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, obviously, we have the luxury of working in these amazing studios, and so you push up the fader and it sounds great. It's
True.
not always the case, but drums is a large topic, so it's hard to answer this question succinctly.
No, totally. I set you up for a big one.
Let me share a story real quick.
Okay.
So I was on this project where it was an interesting project because there was like lots of different bands coming in and playing on the same back line.
Okay.
And it was like a project where it was a bunch of like newer artists and you know, younger musicians, but it was with established producers.
Mm.
And so, you know, the whole day, you know, the producer and the engineer were trying to get it sounding great. The drums were not really that great sounding, and they keep cranking on the knobs and keep trying all these things, and wasn't really that great. And then at one point, one of the producers that came in was a drummer, like a famous drummer. And just for fun, he sat down on the drum kit and started playing, and it sounded amazing. So it's like, you know, I was like, well, that's the answer. Like, all these people were not playing hard or solid, or,
Yeah.
you know, it's the player you know, is a large part of the sound as well. And
That's true.
so that's, you know, I hate to turn it back on the artist, but at the same time, you know, a large part of great sounding recordings is great performances. And yes, there is a lot we can do to fix things nowadays. You know, we can tune things, we can time align things, we can do all that. But if the original source, you know, of the performance is not great, I mean, yeah, we can even put in samples if we have to with drums. But even then, like as a drummer, I honestly try to avoid using samples because to me, it starts to make it feel fake. You know, and obviously it's a balance. Like if you keep them low enough, you can still, you know, have that natural sound, but then it doesn't quite, you can't quite change the sound enough if they're too low.
Yeah.
And so it's always a balance. So you know, if I had to choose, it would be an amazing drummer in a great room, tuned well with, you know, obviously who wouldn't choose that?
That's what you're going to choose?
Who wouldn't choose that?
Tough decision. It really is true that there is a lot, like when somebody is really honed in their craft, you know, the consistency that a great session drummer will hit the snare in the same place.
Right.
Like, that's why, you know, you walk into a place like East West and somebody has like a U67 on the snare. And you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Where you have a session where the person's not going to hit that microphone.
Yes.
That drummer doesn't hit mics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, the consistency that they hit with, or even guitars. Like I've handed my guitar to a friend who's an amazing player.
Right.
And I'm like, well, wait a minute. That sounds fucking amazing.
Right.
And you're like, oh, wait. It's my fingers that aren't great. It's like your fingers are different than mine, and the way that you hold those strings down is like, it just sounds so much better.
Yeah.
You know, so there's so much to just honing your craft. When did you come to Los Angeles?
I came to LA in 2001.
2001. Okay.
Yeah.
I came in 2006.
Okay.
Would you tell a young engineer in 2024 that it's a good idea or a bad idea to move to a major music hub like LA when you look at the cost of LA and how tough it is to break in?
I would say it's about where your career goals are.
I like that answer.
I think that there's a mountain of people out there that work in small towns, that have little studios, that work in their home studio or in their house or little local studios, and they all have great careers.
Yeah.
Frankly. And it's a different kind of life. You're probably not going to work with, you know, Beyonce or a super A-list celebrity.
Right.
You know, would be probably rare. But like I said, there's many people that have great careers. And so it's a little bit different because I would say it's different now as to early 2000s because the prevalence of home studios has, you know, gone through the roof.
Exploded.
Everyone has a home studio.
Yeah. Or two.
And quite frankly, you can get amazing results at home for a fraction of the cost of a big studio.
Oh, yeah.
And so that if anything, has, increased the argument for not doing this, and just doing it in a small town and setting up a studio yourself and doing it. But the idea is that if you're doing it yourself and not working for a studio, you then have to learn all about business because you're opening a business for yourself.
Yeah.
Marketing and everything else. And that's the same if you do it in LA or any of the big hubs.
It's true.
Because ultimately, the goal is to be freelance and you have your own studio and you do it yourself and you are running a business.
Yeah.
And so the pros and cons are really if you want to try to work with super A-list celebrities. And that's, there's pros and cons to that too.
Yeah, I agree.
Obviously, makes it easier when you have big credits under your belt and you can get clients and people are interested in that. Actually working with some of those people can be really rewarding and great, but it's sometimes can be, a bit of a letdown because they're not as great as you think they are. It's like you get to see behind the curtain. And I'm not going to, certainly not going to name names about anyone, but it's happened to me once or twice before where it's like, I really respect an artist and they come in and they're nice people and they're cool and they're just not as good as performers as I thought they were.
Right.
Because you get to see the editing taking place and you get to see certain things.
Yeah.
So
see how the sausage is made.
You see, yeah. Like, honestly, like I've been asked before, like, what if you had the opportunity to work with, your absolute favorite band? And honestly, I don't know if I would take that opportunity because of that reason. Because I'd rather it be a mystery and then be, the amazing person that I idolize instead of seeing behind the curtain and seeing, oh, they're amazing musicians, but they're kind of a jerk, or they're kind of, not nice to the runner, or they're not amazing performers, or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a different world. You know what I mean?
That's an interesting answer. I know what you mean. I've experienced that a little bit in my experience. A lot of the really big artists I've worked with, if they're present in the room, are generally more hardworking and nicer than I think the public believes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because if you really suck, like if you're a real shitty person,
Right.
you're probably not going to claw your way to the top unless you're like undeniably amazing. And then you can be a prick.
Yeah.
But if you're really talented and people love you and they want to support you,
Right.
I think a lot of, to flip a lighter side, a lot of people are a lot nicer than I think you'd expect.
No, and I agree. And I do want to touch on that too, because, a large majority of the time, the actual celebrity themselves is the nicest, sweetest person, and they're super cool and they're very talented, but sometimes the entourage
the entourage
are not so fun to deal with.
So, I mean, I guess when you're an assistant, you run into this the most is the old school engineer that's just like a little brutal.
Right.
I feel like that's more uncommon. Sorry to any of the engineers that have been a prick to me, but you were a prick. Oh, wait, before we move on, you were talking about credits. You have some big credits. I have some big credits. How much do you think credits actually play a role in getting work? Do they really matter? This is a loaded question.
It is a loaded question. They matter, but they don't matter at the same time.
I know, I agree.
Because, so for all of the small town engineers that don't have big credits, or honestly anyone that doesn't have a huge credit list, they're still working. They're still making a great career for themselves.
Yep.
There's still plenty of people that would love to work with them.
Yeah.
Again, I think this ties back to my original topic of the personality match. And that credits don't matter. Big, stuff you've worked on at the end of the day doesn't matter, because there's still going to be a mountain of people that want to work with you because you are who you are.
Yes.
And on the same token, the big credits do get you some gigs. And sometimes it's difficult because those people that want to hire you only for your credits may not be a personality match, may not be the right, vibe that you're going for.
Yeah.
And it's also difficult sometimes because, like, for me personally, I've been around in the business long enough where I have big credits from almost every genre. I've worked with Britney Spears and like all this pop stuff and orchestral film recordings and all this stuff, but I focus on rock music.
Right.
Because that's my passion. I could easily, say that I'm a pop engineer or pop mixer or whatever and pull my credit list from that and do that.
Right.
But it's, at the end of the day, like that's the genre niche I was talking about, where it's important to do something that you love to do. Obviously, like we all got into this because we love music and we want to have fun with our careers. And it's difficult because sometimes you get big credits that are not aligned with your genre match.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to steer people a little bit differently, and you get people wanting to hire you for other things that, you have to kind of get those clients all over again with other genres that may not be aligned with. And so it's difficult, you know.
Yeah. That's a really good answer to that question. I think you should be pretty stoked about it, because I agree with all that. Because I feel like when somebody comes to you because of your credits, it's almost immediately one of those transactional experiences.
Yes.
Because they find your website and they're
Yes.
like, oh, you did this record.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to call you. You're going to make my record. And like you said, it's likely not a personality match. They're probably price shopping as well.
Mhm.
They're like looking at everybody that worked on whatever record and hitting them all up. And it's usually a bad fit. And honestly, when you have a big credit, it's because you were probably working at a studio or you knew somebody on that team.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get real work because of that credit, it's going to be for those same reasons. It's going to be because that producer called you again or that studio called you again, not because you did that record.
Yes.
So I think that was, everybody should save that little clip. I don't know, transcribe that answer and read it once a year. Okay, so now I wanted to do a hard tangent that I've been threatening to do for a while.
Okay.
You do photography.
Yeah.
I am getting into video, doing the YouTube thing, been doing the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I love to pull creative inspiration out of like doing this podcast, or oddly enough, like listening to like business podcasts and trying to figure out how like that'll, change the way I mix or whatever.
Right.
What non-music things do you pull creative inspiration from, if any?
Definitely photography. I originally got into it in high school. My dad was a, hobbyist photographer.
Yeah.
And I kind of fell out of it for a long time because digital kind of came up and was terrible in the beginning, kind of similar to audio. And then I got back into it, and I've just been doing like landscape photography just for fun. I even, there was a few times years ago where I was like commissioned to, take a specific photo and do this thing, and they were going to pay me and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, cool. I'll totally do that. And it was terrible because I had to do it in a specific way, and as an artist, it's like I do photography because I love, taking a hike or going out in nature or whatever and capturing what inspires me.
Yeah.
If I'm forced to do something and to fit into a little box with my creativity, then it's not fun anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's also been interesting because with photography and audio and engineering, there's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of things, like a great lens is similar to a great mic. It's like if you get a great capture in the beginning, then the processing is going to be a lot easier. The mixing and the Photoshop and all that, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Even to the effect of like, the mix control on a reverb is very similar to like the opacity layers on Photoshop, where you can blend in a different color, and it's very similar. There's a lot of parallels.
That's cool.
And so I use that, and also, I'm really into mountain biking and snow skiing and different things like that. And I use those as a way to sort of, stay focused in the studio and stay present. It's like if I get work too hard and stay in the same room for too long, you lose your perspective, you lose your clarity, everything else. And it's good to take breaks and, have a different perspective and all those kind of things. So
Totally.
Yeah.
I love exercise for that reason. I feel like if I get a good workout, I get a lot of ideas.
Right.
And I find like this week has been, a big run of podcasts and YouTube stuff for me. And, when you leave here, I'm going to be stoked to start mixing. Like I'm going to be like really energized to get in there. So I think it's important for people. The root of that question is that I think it's important for engineers, mixers to have like outside creative hobbies because I just think it's freeing,
right,
to a certain extent. But you mentioned that you don't like to fit in the box that this person gave you about the potential photography gig, right? Do you ever get frustrated when that happens in your mixing, or because that's more of your job, or do you navigate that better
I mean,
differently?
I feel like I navigate it better because it's part of the job.
Yeah,
And it's interesting because, with mixing, it's like you're expected to bring your creative interpretation into it as well,
it's true.
to an extent.
It's true.
It's like you're expected to, I've even had, clients ask me, it's like, yeah, I appreciate that you want to stick to my vision and ideals, but I'm hiring you because of your style and your, perspectives. And so I want you to, go to town with it in a way that I can't think of,
Yeah.
And so it's that balance that really is rewarding when mixing. So
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. I would love to chat forever, but we've been sitting in these chairs for a while. For
good.
anybody that doesn't know, I was just on his show. Pro Audio Perspectives is the new title, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, if you're seeing this, that's probably out already. You should go check out his podcast. But I've got 2 questions that I close my show with. Like you have a couple
Sure.
questions you close your show with. So let me hit you with those.
Okay.
Was there a time that you ever chose to redefine what success meant for you?
I guess the idea that kind of ties back into what I've been talking about, where, learning to figure out personality matches with my clients, learning to figure out, to portray my own personal preferences and not just my credit list, because I haven't had the chance to work with my absolute favorites. And those are a little bit different than what my credit list is.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring out how I can find those people that are more aligned with the music that I want to listen to, whether I work with them or not. And so that's been kind of an ongoing thing for me, is redefining that. And so, you can be friends with your clients, you can work with people love to work with. And that's a big part of it, because obviously if you're working, you're staying busy and you're making great money and you're doing a lot of work, but you're not loving it all,
Yeah.
then it's not as fulfilling as it can be.
I love this, like this thread that we've had about the, working with people that are personality matches. Cause I feel like that's where I am in my
Mhm.
career. Do you think that starting your career with that mindset could make it harder because you're going to do less work and learn slower? Or will it make your career better because you're going to love what you're doing the whole time? I don't know.
That's
Myself,
it's
that's a hard
tricky.
one.
Yeah. I would think that it would be easier
I think it would be
because
too.
there's so many projects that I took on in the past that, I did because it was a great opportunity, but looking back, it wasn't a great career choice. You know, like, yeah, this is a great credit, but like I don't talk about Britney Spears. I don't talk about the big credits the music that I don't want to work with.
Right, right.
So it's like, was that cool? Yeah, it was a paycheck,
Yeah,
but was it fulfilling? Was it exciting? Yeah, a little bit, but ultimately no.
yeah,
So
yeah. I've got a good Britney story. I'll share when we're done.
Okay.
So last question is, what is your current biggest goal? What's the next smallest step you're going to take to go towards that goal?
My current biggest goal is to walk the talk. Really just to get aligned with, people that are a good personality match.
Yeah,
And also get aligned with people that I love their music no matter what. And granted, 90% of my clients are that already, which I'm fortunate. So
that's
I'm
an
not
awesome
trying
place
to,
be.
say I hate my job, but just keeping that going and to, really get aligned with people in a way that I can be their friends and we can keep in touch and we can, have much more than just a transactional relationship.
Yeah,
That's the ultimate goal.
I love that. The
And
transactional stuff sucks.
yeah,
It's just not fun.
yeah,
It's not fun.
exactly.
Dude, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for
Of
bringing
course.
your rig into my
Yeah,
studio and
of
letting me
course.
see
My
how
pleasure.
like cameras work.
Yeah.
So definitely please share where people can find you, where they can find your podcast, where they can work with you, whatever you want, share it.
Yeah. I mean, my website is my full name, brendandekora.com. And the podcast is at proaudioperspectives.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and all the places. So
podcast is great, by the way.
Thank you.
You've had some killer guests that
Awesome.
I have to track down myself and try to get them on my show, but people should check that out and check your website out.
Great.
Thanks, dude. Thanks for coming over, man.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Progressions. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Be sure to check out all the links and resources mentioned in the episode down below in the video description or in your podcast show notes. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, please leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps the show so much. And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to drop any thoughts or questions about the episode down below. Let's keep the conversation going. For those of you watching, you'll be getting a link to another episode you might enjoy popping up somewhere right about now. And for those of you listening, check out the YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see y'all next time.